welcome to another episode of Auction Watch, where we deep dive into some property deals which are coming up for sale at forthcoming auctions. Now, avid viewers of this series, and I'll put links to some of the other shows that we have done, avid viewers of this series have actually bought properties from recommendations on this very show. So make sure you stay tuned. What have we got coming up on today's show? Well, we got an office to resi conversion project up in Wiltshire. We've got a Chinese restaurant, which is a complete freehold with upper parts as well, down in Horley. And we've got a very interesting proposition of a portfolio of 233 properties with a guide price of just £10,500. And we have a whole shopping centre in Wales, which is producing 50% rental yields. That's all coming up. To help with all this auction analysis, I'm going to be joined as usual by guests Piotr Rusinek, Jay Howard and Rod Turner. So keep watching because you may want to buy one of these bargains. So if you've arrived at this channel for the very first time, my name's Ranjan Bhattacharya. I've been investing and developing properties for the last 30 years. Welcome to this channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we upload, because we put out tons of new property related videos each and every week, all to help you be on top of your property investing game. And be sure to like and tell us what do you think of these deals that we are talking about. Do so in the comments below. So let's get on with it as I get the panel to introduce themselves.
My name is Rod Turner. I am the host of a podcast called The Rodcast, which is all about asset-backed investments with a focus on UK real estate. My background is in development, mostly in London and Manchester, and I own a property investment company, and we buy all sorts of things from commercial and industrial right through to residential developments as well.
Hi everybody, my name's Jay Howard. I'm a property auction expert. I've been buying and selling properties through auction for 12 years, and I worked as the auction manager for a London auction company for 6 years. I like commercial properties, short lease properties, and have recently gained a little bit of a hankering for some ad hoardings. Make of that what you will, but I'm always happy to share.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I've been trading properties for about 10 years in auctions and working with investors on the buying side and the selling side. And at the moment, we've got our venture called Hammered, where we help people maximize the auction sale prices, basically. And that's our job. We're selling 8 properties in the auctions this month. Next one is also mine. Now, also one that I'm selling for another client, but this one it's 2 steps ahead because it's already got planning. It used to be a commercial unit, so it's this whole building that is being offered. It's site at 15 Duke Street, Trowbridge. It's guided £450,000 plus, and it's quite a big site. And also, it used to be basically owned by the Wiltshire Times. So they've been there since the 1900s, and they were creating the papers and printing the papers and doing everything in there. It is actually great to listed site, but it's kind of been changed over the years. It now got planning permission for 9 units, residential units, 5 2-bedroom houses, 1 1-bedroom house, and 3 1-bedroom flats. And it's also got, I believe, a listed building consent for the alterations. So all those things are there. It's like the one before. That one was a commercial building with potential. This one, it's already got the planning potential kind of in place. Now it's only a matter of actually realizing that potential. And I would say those development sites are not very frequent in auctions because they usually it takes a bit of time to do due diligence and for developers to find out about all the things that they need to find out to actually perform a development. But we've sold about 5 of those development sites in auctions in the last year, and there is a market for that. And what do you guys think of this one?
I like the planning split on it. I'm normally, when I look at, I'm never going to develop anything, but when I look at planning permission, it says, oh, I've got planning permission for 27 2-bedroom flats. I think you're very, very limited in scope there. I like the fact that there's a good mix of houses to flats and different numbers of bedrooms, because it means that you'll probably open up to quite a varied market, as well as differing value levels as well. So I kind of look at that as a bit of a de-risk from a very kind of perhaps not quite a sophisticated mindset as a developer, but I quite like that. I think it means that if flats are the substance of the day, then your flats are going to fly. If there's if the area isn't heavily populated by a 2.3 kind of household, 2 parents and 3 children, then and it's just single people, and it depends on what the market is. I actually quite like that mix of asset there. Rod's the developer, maybe he's got a more attuned idea as to what looks better, but from an ignorant point of view, I quite like that.
Yeah, I think on this side, because it's a development site, and I want to make sure that when I'm selling a development site, we give as much information to developers as possible early on, so they can actually get the initial questions, why the seller is selling, like how was the design and stuff. Once they got those questions kind of answered and they've got peace of mind about those major things, they can actually get on with the due diligence on the real thing. So on this one, we did an interview with the seller, and they told us why they're selling the property. And one of the reasons is basically the JV partner has got this, who provided funding, has got this property in a SAS, and the SAS cannot hold a residential property, so they could only get planning, and up to that stage, they either have to go for refinancing and then developing this themselves, or they have to sell the property and liquidate the asset, basically. So they're going as first option for selling. But the second thing is we also did an interview with an architect and how they designed the whole thing. And actually, as you can see on this this thing, it's kind of like the splitting of those things. This used to be residential probably 100 years ago, and it was adapted to a commercial use. So actually putting this back into residential use, it was fairly simple. And that's how the mix was created. Well, what do you think about sites like this, Rod, with your development hat on?
I was going to say, Jay might say he's never going to do a development, but I got close to trying to make him do it. Very close, but he just managed to wriggle his way out of it. Well, I think this just comes down to, like you said, that last point about the architecture and the drawings is really almost the most important bit, because it comes down to what you're buying per square foot, how much extra space you're adding, the cost per square foot of any extra space, and the cost per square foot of the conversion versus what value you're going to get for it per square foot, really. And that's what it's all about. So if it's like you say, in terms of being a simple kind of conversion of those spaces, then great. The cheaper the better. Again, it comes back to the value. If the value in the area is only sort of £200 per square foot, and the cost of converting it's going to be sort of £1,500 per square foot, plus your finance fees, plus your professional fees, then it might be a little bit tight. If, however, the value is much higher, then it looks like a winner. And then it's again doing the normal due diligence that you would of who's in the market, and are there people that want flats in the area, and are there people that want 2 beds. And back to Jay's point, it's a nice little mix of different properties. So it's looking at what the target audience is that you're going for. But yeah, it's a nice enough building. In terms of the listed building consent, that wouldn't bother me too much, really. It's finding out what exactly is listed within that. What you might find is, I don't know, it could be a chimney or something like that you wanted to take down, and actually is going to be a bit of a pain in the arse to to sort out. But once you've got a good idea from the heritage officer and understand exactly what's required, then it's just a case of pricing it up.
Yeah.
I think the person that buys this will be someone who is has a strong competency in the build out phase, because that's how you're going to make money on this. And it's all down to what your bag is. Personally, I'm more of an investor, and I like to get the planning uplift, and I build out stuff that I have got the planning uplift for, mainly because I make enough from the planning uplift to compensate for me not being that great at the development uplift, because ultimately I don't have my own development teams. I pay retail money like anyone else to hire contractors to do the works.
I highly doubt that.
Sorry? So, I mean, I'd probably make it up in the project management, because project management is key to getting a development project done. But I think that there are a lot of people out there with a very strong core competency in actually the build-out phase, and they would be looking to home in on their core competencies, subject to all the due diligence that Rod suggested, which I fully endorse, checking out. So I think that would be the buyer for this.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thanks for your comments, guys. Let's move on to the next one. Which is Jay's slot again. All right, Jay, give us the outline.
Okay, so this is lot number 36 in the Allsop commercial auction. It's 35 Station Road in Horley in Surrey, RH6. It's a freehold restaurant and residential investment. Guide is a range of 225 to 250, and it represents a gross yield of 7.6%. It is let until 2027 with no breaks, and included in that lease is the upper floors, which is the maisonette. It's 6-week completion available, no VAT applicable on the purchase. This is something that I've obviously Piotr looked at it as well. We looked at this and we thought, where have we seen a situation like this before? It must have been, a year or two ago? We were looking in Bromley.
That was 22 months ago.
22 months, so almost 2 years ago. We were looking at 2 sites in, I think, the Barnet Ross auction. And they were in Bromley or Beckenham? Bromley? They were both in Bromley.
Yes, both in Bromley.
The buildings were commercial on the ground floor with the resi above, all let under the same lease. So it was a commercial offering. Had beautiful high kind of roofs, and it was just when people were starting to pay attention to the kind of loft conversions and things like that. So this one here is the kitchen shop, and then just on the other side, so just around that corner where you see on the far left-hand side.
Yeah, that was that. The other side almost doesn't matter because
it doesn't matter, but it was very much positioned just like this, where you had the whole commercial offering. The reason I like this is because at the moment, auctioneers, and I guess agents as well, are valuing these based on the commerciality of it, so the lease and what's coming in from it. But when that lease expires, you get that flat back, right? And then all of a sudden you have a commercial element, and then you have a separate flat which you can refurbish, title split, sell off, keep the commercial, chuck it in a SAS or a SIP. There are so many different potentials, and in the interim, you've got a nice, decent yield, is my view. It's a takeaway, so everyone loves Chinese on a Friday night. I like it. I like it, just like I like the one in Bromley.
So Jay, what's the yield right now? Obviously, it depends what you buy, but
7.5% on guide.
Okay.
7.5 on guide.
How long until the lease goes?
About 7 years.
No breaks.
Okay.
About 7 years.
7 years, and what would a flat above that shop on its own? What would that be going for if you took that back and sold it off on a long lease?
About 200 to 25.
225, and then
200 to 225, yeah.
And what's the guide again? Sorry.
225 to 250.
Okay. So you'd be making your money back then. It's just whether you're happy to wait and get the income until that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there separate access to the flat above?
The access to the flat above, it's a good question. It's from the front.
From the front, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a great find. It's a great lot. One piece of due diligence I always like to do is to see whether there's any scope of that lease ending early. So with a restaurant, go and eat there. Order a takeaway on a Friday night and find out how long it takes to arrive. If they're saying, oh yeah, we'll get it to you in 15 minutes, then they're not that busy. And it's very important to do that because there are food places which are roaring right now, but there's some which are struggling. It's usually because of bad product and service. And what I find is that those sort of people will be looking for an out from their lease. A lot of people with small businesses, they rarely blame themselves for failing. It's always to do with other things like COVID or Brexit, or they'll blame everything apart from crap food and crap service. So if that is the case, you may actually find that after purchasing, there's an opportunity to have some chats with the vendor who would be very, very happy because this vendor has had £25,000 grant, COVID grant on this, may have had a bounce back loan, and be quite happy to, get out and surrender the lease, which means that your property is back. So don't underestimate that as a potential option, but you can only really do that after the auction.
Yeah. I think on this one, I would actually welcome getting the property back or at least negotiating getting the flat back from that lease, and then creating a new lease for the lower parts. Because that was one of we're actually bidding for a client on that property in Bromley that Jay mentioned. And we actually told the client, go up to 315, that's the max, it's going to make money at that level. Our client wants to be conservative. He wants, who was at 295?
295.
The property sold for 296. Probably could have gone a bit higher, but we have got this. The major thing is, this week I was reviewing some properties on the market, and I came across this lot actually, and the commercial, basically the lease finished and the commercial moved out, so you got the whole property back. And I just noticed the commercial part that previously was let at 18k per annum with the flat, the whole thing, it's just been relet at 14.5, and the flat above that shop is worth 250 without a loft extension, and about 350 if you do a loft extension and make a 3-bed masonette, and that's where the money was, and the lease was only 1.5 years. So I think sometimes you just need to basically create those, just take an assessment on what might happen in the future and what the leverage is that you've got over the tenants.
I mean, for this one, this is simple for me. This is in its raw state. It's a good asset in a raw state. If you were to apply 3 or 4 different strategies or value-add elements to it, it still works. And I like the fundamentality of it.
The other thing I quite like about it is looking at it in that case like a raw asset. You've got so much negotiating power because actually you want that property back. So if that person's not willing to increase the rents, go up with the rent reviews, things like that, you're in a hugely strong kind of negotiating position when it comes to rent reviews. And it could be quite a nice time to take it back there.
And Rod, what you've just summarised is basically my commercial property investment strategy. There's the only commercial properties I buy where you're in a better position if they vacate. That way you get your rents paid and you're in a strong position.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I think this one is a good one for our game. What is going to sell for?
So what's it on the market again for?
225 to 250.
And you reckon the flat alone is worth about 250? Did you say?
220.
225, yeah.
I'll go with 300.
300 is a good shout. I would go up to 300. I'd be happier at 290, but I'd go to 300.
What did you say the guided at?
225 to 250.
25. I think, I don't know what does 300 work out on a yield basis? Because I think someone, may actually have that be happy with that at a 6.5%.
That's almost 6, 5 and a bit percent.
Okay.
So it'll be 5.66%.
Okay.
I think Ranjan's going to say 280.
I think 5.6, under 6% in that area, when there's uncertainty, when the lease is ending in quite some time, it's a little bit too far out for 6. I think I see why the guide is set at that level.
Are you saying 6%?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, of course, that could come out of it is you've always got to remember. I mentioned, eat there and check out the restaurant. It could be that this guy is doing particularly well, and he will buy it. So you've always got to look out for prosperous or tenants who are doing particularly well with commercial property, particularly if they've been there a few years, because then they can possibly buy it. It's a little bit harder now, everyone's got their cash flow constricted, but you just don't know.
So for the purpose of the game, you're saying 283. Exactly.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Good. But I'm going to go with 291.
Odd figures.
Typical.
There's going to be a bidding war between and also I know the seller of this property, and they're selling a few other bits in the also residential auction, which are adjustment to this property. And I saw bidding on their previous properties, and their properties have always done well in the auction. So I think this one's going to be equally as competitive. 291.
Yeah, it's important knowing that the adjoining properties leading up to the corner of the parade are also going to auction. So there is an asset management opportunity to picking up the whole end of that terrace.
They're not in the same auction, though, are they?
No, one's in the commercial, one's in the resi.
Residential auction.
Is that one fully residential then?
No, they have some commercial in there every once in a while. If they miss the commercial cutoff and they make a late decision, then they put it into resi.
So I think the other ones were put into residential auction because number one, they're predominantly residential. And number two, they've got the commercial element, which is vacant, and it's got residential potential. And those vacant commercials with residential potential are always offered in the residential auction rather than the commercial one. The commercial auction would offer things that have got income already in place and fairly secure leases. That's my view. Okay, brilliant. So the last two lots that we've got coming up, Rod. Is your one. This is quite a diamond, or not the diamond.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've kind of
peculiar one.
I've got this one not because it's something that I would like to buy, but more because I think it's something interesting to talk about, really. So this is lot 12 of the Barnet Ross auction, and it is a portfolio of 233 rent charges on 255 houses in various locations around Avon, Cheshire, Greater Manchester, Lancashire, Merseyside and Somerset. So a couple of interesting kind of things probably we should discuss. So what is a rent charge? Because often this kind of gets, the term gets misused. So it's an annual sum paid by a freeholder to a third party who normally has no other interest in the property. So it's not ground rent, it's different. It's charged to the freeholder. Now, some people might be thinking, well, why are there 233 rent charges over 255 houses? And so typically what this would be is it's on the land, and often there would be development potential when this is bought out. And these are centuries old kind of charges, really. And so what would happen is then that land would be apportioned and the rent charge would come through there. So what's likely happened is people have then built on the land and apportioned each plot some rent charge. So there's some interesting stuff going on with rent charges, because there was a new act brought out, I think in around the late 70s, which basically gave them a cut-off date. Now, if you, Piotr, if you can just share the screen again and go back, I'll be able to kind of tell you a bit more, a bit more info about that. So I think, where is it? Yeah, 2037 is when the rent charges will compulsorily extinguish. Okay, so what that basically means is you can't then extend them over that period of time. So assuming these rent charges everyone pays, then that's worth about 44 grand. Okay, and it's being offered at, I think, around £10,000. Yeah, £10,500. So again, you look at that and you think, okay, that's a good yield, but let's remember this is over a long period of time, and this is not inflation adjusted. So maybe if you think there's going to be a deflationary outlook over that period of time, it might be something you look to, but it's not the same as buying an asset that's got inflation hedges and collecting a yield. There's also
there's some rental arrears as well, and how do you enforce those rent charges? Is it as easy as ground rents?
Well, this is the other thing. So the rent arrears are, I think, £6,700, which have been accrued over 6 years. Now, the purchaser has to pay 50% of those arrears, okay, when they purchase it. So although you might buy it for 10,500, actually you've got to add on another 6,500 or 3,250 to that price. And then it's up to you to enforce those rent charges. And remember, these are very, very old, and it's likely that they're sort of £2, or it would have been a shilling and sixpence or something like that when they were bought up. So they can be quite, what can often be the case is actually the cost of collecting them can often be more than the cost of what you receive. Now, there are some things you can do. So what you can do is you can contact these freeholders to which owe the rent charge, or the freeholders can fill out an application to actually essentially buy the rent charge in full. So if this is the case, they can fill out a form about redeeming their rent charge. You can download it from kind of a government website, and you fill it out, and it will come back with the price, which is normally around 15 times its value. And so if someone's being charged £2, it's often much better for them to get the total value for it up front. One, it helps you with inflation. Two, the cost of you actually getting that and going down the legal channels to acquire that money ends up being cheaper. So it's really, this one is more about the traps involved in this than actually anything else, than the opportunity, I think.
And I think the interesting stuff is that they put a note here that the last two sales of rent charges to rent payers were completed on 28th August at 10 times the annual rent charge payable.
Yeah. So what they're basically saying is the last ones that went at auction, if the rent payable was 10 grand, they were selling for 100 times that. Now, what you've got to factor in is the amount of different properties and rent charges. Because if it was one rent charge at 10 grand, that would be one thing. But having 233 at 10 grand means they're all very, very low sums. So I'm not sure whether 10 times that multiple would then be relevant for this. I think what you need to factor in is if it's a large company that's already got the systems in place to pull back those rent charges, they're the people looking to buy this. I don't think it's going to work for 99.9% of the investors out there, but I just thought it was an interesting one because you don't really see these come up in auction every day. So
You don't see them very often, no.
It's a perfect place for those things in the auction because no one knows what to do with those. And
exactly, yeah.
you just chuck them in 26%, someone will buy them.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? People look at those headline figures and think, "God, that's a great rate," but actually, when you look at the underlying, I think there's a few too many traps. And the worst thing people can do is assume this is similar to ground rent, and it certainly isn't. And there is no sort of reversionary rate and things like that. So,
I guess who might buy those properties could be like a large ground rent owner or like a large ground rent investor, or maybe there's rent charge investors out there who
really what this is like is it's a bit like buying a car as an investment to then lease out, and it's a depreciating asset all the way down until finally you can't sell it at the end because it's so knackered it's just got to go to the scrapyard. And that's really the same kind of model that this is. So you've got to be looking at those numbers over the long period of time. And what's important about this is it's the cost of getting in that rent, which really is the thing that that can kind of tear this apart.
As Rod alluded to, I think the buyer of this will already have several thousand rent charge properties on their books, and they'll just put it through their existing systems processes.
Put all the details on the system, and it just blasts out letters every 6 weeks until they pay. And the drive of actually running it to a cost is reduced marginally, right? But yeah, this is. I think people will make a mistake on something like this. There's the story that Scott Hendry from Together Finance always tells when he's asked, what's the worst thing you've ever seen someone pay for at an auction? He said, well, this woman approached me after once she bought a lot. She came over, she was ecstatic. Goes, I bought this block of flats, like 16 flats at auction. I've only paid £173,000. This, that, and the other. It turns out she bought the freehold ground rent. She thought she was buying a block of physical flats that she could rent and sell. And people make that mistake with this. People assume that rent charges is just a different terminology for freehold ground rent, and
you are not buying 255 houses with this one,
and you're not buying 255 ground rents either.
No.
Very important to know what you're reading, and that's true for all of commercial properties as well, because so many times you got the shop and an upper flat, but one of the flats is sold off on a long lease, so you don't have that. Or two of the flats have got regulated tenancies in from 1981 or something. So those are massively diminished in that. And these are just little phrases in the catalogue which fundamentally affect the value.
And another thing they're often called is like chief rents as well. So rent charges or chief rents. So that's the thing to just look out for.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we're in the world of the high yielding properties. How about a 50% yield in Wales?
Yes.
Tell us about the property.
I did a little video on this on our YouTube channel where I went through this exciting lot, and I'd love to see what you guys make of it. You can buy a whole goddamn shopping centre in Wales, in the lovely town of Rhyl, and it really is a real deal. The rent roll is some £553,000 per annum, and it's guided at 1.1 million. So that's a 50% yield on this lovely looking property. Now
I'm assuming that's the gross over the gross over the net, is it?
Yeah. I mean, the big issues with this are that some of those shops in that centre ain't doing that well, and there's the arrears. And I'd like to sort of, when you look through the legal pack, in the special conditions, the buyer is responsible for settling all the arrears on that rent roll. So as well as your purchase price, you will be down for some arrears on that portfolio. Some of those shops are struggling and are planning to close. So it might be looking at this 50% yield right now, but it's in one of those areas. It's a fairly, it's not a very prosperous area, shall we say. So a lot of those shops are struggling. They will shut. And the problem with these destination shopping centres is that the minute you lose a core room of stores within them, it's tumbleweed. No one needs people go into those destination shopping centres because one shop's footfall feeds on the other, and the minute you lose a rump of them, then there's no reason to go there, because people want to go there because they want to go to this shop, that shop, the other shop. People don't really always go to just one shop, so it just loses its and a trickle of exiters turns into a bit of a flood. And the other big challenge with this one, which I think people miss, is the repurposability. It would be there's no permitted development on it, but even if you wanted to knock the thing down and rebuild, the average sale values there, £139 a square foot. You can buy 2-bedroom flats in real for 50 grand. You know, so you'd struggle to be able to build something on there where your cost of build out will actually even break even.
I think the only
what
way
do you do with a site like that?
I think the only way you'd repurpose that is by having a contract with a housing association or care facility or someone who's underwritten by the government to be able to build at higher prices, build those out and get an income securitized to give a higher price on the yield, because otherwise, as you say, the repurpose ability of that site is very, very slim. Even if you're just repurposing the use class, the fit out, things like that, you're not adding capital value. You might be adding a bit of income, which could potentially give you some extra value, but I think it's very tricky. I think the arrears point is one to be to kind of take note of, because where you've got quite a few of these operators are big businesses, but they're looking to shut down. They've got big legal departments behind them. And so the cost of actually looking at these arrears and getting these down might be quite substantial. I'd also be wanting to have a look at the area in terms of investment going into the area. And I know it's a seaside town, but what's happening there in terms of kind of how many families are expected to be there over the next 10 years? Is it a growing number? Is the population kind of is it an aging population there? Is there infrastructure spending going on there? I'd want to know a lot about that. I think there comes a point where you look at this and you go, yes, it may be a sinking ship, but it's just throwing off so much cash that it's worth it, even if that amount of cash is going down every year until the point at which we look to repurpose it and we spend that time doing that. And that can still work. It can still be worth it on that view. But I do think it's looking at everything involved, the operational costs of that site. Again, it's a bit like the rent charge, where collecting the money, how easy is it going to be to collect? How easy is it going to be to manage a site when things are closed? Because actually your operational costs may go up with things like security and that sort of thing. So I think it's one for a big operator that knows what their end goal is and how to get there in terms of repurposability. As far as an asset management play, I think it's going to be tricky, and I think you just look at the values you're going to get from that income over a period and make the best out of what is really a bad site. Yeah, I think the headline numbers are appealing, aren't they? So
I looked at a shopping centre in Acuitus auction about 3 years ago. I was
Scotland.
It was in Falkirk, Calendar Shopping Centre, and that was actually purchased. Well, offered with a guide price of 1 million and 600k income, so a bit more, a bit better yields.
I think you also want to have a really good look at who the occupiers are, because I saw B&M stores and they're expanding. They're opening however many stores this year. And it's looking at who are the anchors there that are going to bring people in. So if you've got a big supermarket like B&M that's bringing people in, that's taking up a big chunk of the space, then it's right, what other shops can you come and feed off those anchor tenants that are going to do well? And it's just, I think that's quite important. You're looking at the ones that you know are going to close and thinking, right, well, how much sway did they have over the whole site? Because if they're smaller ones, it may not be as bad as it sounds. But if it's the big anchors, then you do need to look at, right, what can you get in there to start attracting footfall in? Because that's how shopping centres survive.
And I think the question as well is, that's a good question to engage in, but also how long can you survive without tenants in that shopping centre, or with that amount of tenants? Because that rental income, 500 or 600k, that's usually inclusive of service charges. And as a landlord, you're responsible for the security, responsible for insurance, electricity to common areas, heating of the common areas, and all those things. And plus, on vacant units, you have to pay the business rates. Yeah. And all those things are like a hole in the ship. And how quickly can you get that water out of your ship in order to keep your ship afloat?
I mean, I'm going to put my neck out here and say that I don't think it's going to reach guide. I think it's an unattractive unit. I just can't see it, and it'd be one that I'd be interested to track. There's another little story to this one as well, because one of the things we looked at was the accounts on Companies House for the company that's selling this particular property, and what we found on their accounts basically was that they've lost £13 million worth of balance sheet asset value in a year. And it seems that's come from lenders kind of reassessing the values of the properties held in this company's portfolio. And this disposal is as a result of the lenders putting pressure on them to shore up their balance sheet. There are more and more commercial property companies who are facing this issue if they've got portfolios made up of unrepurposable properties.
Well, this is something that people forget from 2007, 2008. There are a lot of people who were not defaulting on their mortgages, but were in negative equity. You know, when their asset classes were being reassessed, either for remortgage value or even mid-mortgage revaluations, and you know they were being repossessed, or you know, all of these different situations. And I think the amount of money that people have been paying for assets, I've gone off on a right tangent, for the last year or two, actually, if the government steps back on its quantitative easing, and the heat in the property market diminishes as it should have done a year ago, may find themselves in quite an appreciable amount of negative equity going into either remortgage in a year or 18 months or 2 years. I guess most people do a 2-year rate. There are big problems there. I used to set myself a challenge with assets of this kind. I bought a block of an office block in Birmingham in 2009. And it was showing a 50% yield, but obviously that was gross. The net yield was a tenth of that, pretty much. And I used to set myself a challenge of how I could turn the gross yield into the net yield. And on a block of something like a block of an office block, it's fairly easy to do that if you have the wherewithal about you. But on something like this, you're pretty much on a shot to nothing. In terms of you're going to shoot yourself and you can end up with nothing. The guys who did the Scottish property, what they did is they created a whole community value around it, and that's how they kind of got it through. I don't know how.
But they tried.
They tried, exactly.
The COVID just killed it, and I think 2 months ago was announced the shopping centre is completely closing. So.
But they did well for a couple of years. For 3 years, they brought it back to life, right?
They did, yes.
But yeah, COVID has done that to a lot of businesses.
And I think some of the value of the shopping centre is all the ancillary stuff that they've got. Because I think with this and the Scottish one, you could also separate the car park from the other bits, and then you can run that car park as a separate asset. And then
one of my questions was going to be, what size car park does it have, and is it charged?
It's 270 spaces, and it would be ideal for a COVID test and trace centre.
Well, car parks are valuable, but also things like, well, someone might buy this, they might notice that capital allowances haven't been brought forward, and might see actually a load of value in that. I do think, obviously, no one wants to buy a liability, which seems to be what this is going to end up being with all these empty units and non-payers and businesses in there going bust. But it's, I think what is key is it's these anchors in there and how sort of sure they are of bringing people and footfall into that shopping centre. But without being able to repurpose the site, I think it's very, very tricky. And you want to be very, very careful with what's happening there.
Let me just throw one thought about this, because this sort of property, I'm sure people will agree, is pretty much unfinanceable. So you're going to have £1 million in the bank. And if someone's got £1 million in the bank, I think there are better deals to be had. And with that in mind, I say, I really just don't see how this will achieve the guide. It'd be a very interesting one to track.
Yeah. I mean, I'd argue that you'd have to double that million down, I think, because even if you take in purchasing costs, you're going to have, you're going to have to try and recover some of those outstanding amounts. The other way to do it is the same way you would deal with, short leaseholders and freehold block, where you wanted to deal with something. You would say, okay, these are your arrears. Let's wipe those off the face of the earth. Let's renegotiate a term, increase your the length of your IRI or whatever it is, and then add an extra 2 or 3 grand or 5 grand or whatever per annum, and you'll make back that loss and even more over a longer term, and then you reduce the pressures of the existing kind of stresses of the market. Now you have to take a really long, hard look at that situation, because you're being charged the arrears as part of the contract, because the only way to claim the arrears is if you own those arrears in the contract of auction.
Yes.
So you kind of have to look at, say, I have to have £1 million cash. I'd argue you have to have at least £2 million cash, and the foresight and the term and length of investment to kind of cover the back end of that, which you're looking easily is going to be 7 to 10 years tops. Because I don't believe, and I do love a bit of hope value, don't get me wrong, I don't believe there's any repurposability to this site, even knocking it down.
I kind of agree. I think this is like, you're buying a bunch of liabilities. So you buy it per pound. It's like, whoever bought VHS, things like that. I think it's one of those sort of things.
Well, I think the only repurposability is what I've kind of said about housing association, care facilities, anything that's underwritten on the income, where they can actually afford to spend money to repurpose it. Because from a purely capital value point of view, I think it's impossible, really.
Yeah.
So I think all of us are probably going to suggest this won't sell. So we can all tick that box.
I'm suggesting the guide will be reduced and it will sell for 900.
I think it will sell for 1.1.
Rod, the bull in the china shop, love it. I think I'll jump on the bandwagon with Ranjan. I don't think it will sell at auction. I think if it does sell, someone will try and pick it up around the 750 mark.
And we'll never know, because I think it will say sold afterwards for an undisclosed amount.
We'll reveal the amount somehow.
We'll land reg it and hope that the solicitor registered the amount paid. Let's see. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that concludes our auction lots review, and I think we've definitely exceeded our self-imposed deadline of 5 minutes per lot. We never did well with those deadlines, but I hope you guys got a lot of value from this, and you feel a bit more confident assessing those super high-yielding properties, development properties, and all sorts of other assets that are offered in the auctions. And give us your comments and let us know what you thought about this video, which lots you found interesting, and whether you bid on any of those lots. And if you bought the shopping centre in Wales, how much you paid for this. Brilliant. Okay, guys, thanks so much. And to the next time.
Thanks, guys.